Hello, everybody. It's Mary Lynn Harris here of Hard at Work, and welcome back to the Impactful Legacy series that I've been doing for the past few months, speaking with well-trained speakers and experts in their field, and how you can create impactful legacy in your business, and it's all related to your workplace culture. So today I have on the call with me is Robert Mattson, and I just recently met him on via the phone and a video. So anyway, welcome, Robert.
Thanks, Mary Lynn. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So Robert and I were just talking about different ways of how I can further advance what I was been trying to work on. So I just thought that Robert would be a great addition to the podcast series. So maybe Robert, you could tell us a little bit how you kind of got started doing what you're doing now.
Sure, and happy to. I think probably defining what I do, because
Yeah.
it tends to be a little bit different for different people. Some people would call me a speaker's coach. Some people call me a communications or sales skills coach. Uh, Basically, what I do is I take storytelling and help people drive goals through it. So when people think storytelling, they often think about, well, I want to connect with people. I want to get them to like me. But stories are incredibly powerful tools. And if people utilize them
Hmm.
to teach properly, they can be very effective.
Hmm.
Now, there are a lot of people out there that teach storytelling. I kind of do both sides of the coin. So I teach story building, but I also teach storytelling. What does it take to get up in front of a room or on a call or on a webcast like this? And
Hmm.
what does it take to be effective in communicating that story well? Because you can write a great story and tell it poorly, or have a mediocre story and tell it well, and the effect will be entirely different. So
Right.
I teach people both sides of that coin.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what you kind of laid out is gave me 3 steps to follow through. So I'm still working on some of that. That's of course, really important. So if somebody's interested in knowing more about that, they should reach out to you. So tell us about some of the obstacles that you find your clients face about storytelling.
Well, some of them, it's just the belief that storytelling is going to be effective. I
Hmm.
work with a lot of salespeople, and it's like, I'm not going to tell stories to a CEO. It's like, and the first thing I tell them, I said, okay, that CEO once got yelled at for not cleaning his or her room. They probably had a hard time getting a prom date. They had the same challenges that all of us have. CEOs are just people, they happen to have big jobs.
Right.
So once people understand that and they say, okay, then why? Because I'm trying to tell them about my multi-million-dollar technology platform. Why would I tell them the story about a baker? Well, because you can utilize stories to change people's thinking.
Hmm.
If I jump in and just tell you features, facts, and functions, for one thing, it's exactly what your competitors are doing. And another thing, it's not very memorable.
Hmm.
But if I go in and I teach you something using a story about a baker, or when I drop coffee on my lap on a plane,
Hmm.
that's memorable. And it also takes people away from their day to day.
Right.
I tell people, if you're going to teach me how to improve my automotive assembly line, tell me a story about a gardener. Because if you tell me a story about an automotive assembly line, I'm going to get into the details too quickly. And I
Hmm.
am not going to think about the higher themes. But if I take you out of your comfort spot, then you are going to focus on the things that I want you to focus on, and that are going to help you. Now,
Hmm.
with great power comes great responsibility. So you want to use this for the good of both the person you're talking to and yourself. That's
Hmm.
probably the first thing that I have to deal with. And the next few things are really about how do people learn the skills,
Hmm.
because we're all creatures of habit.
Hmm.
We all have the things that work for us and have worked for us for decades. And people have to be convinced sometimes. It's like, listen, I'm not telling you to throw away all the good things you do. I'm saying add another tool to your toolbox, and you might find it really, really effective.
Hmm.
Sometimes I even walk into a class with a bolt and two wrenches, and I show the bolt and I show the wrench. I say, "Is this the right tool for this job?" And they'll say, "Well, yeah." And then I'll show them that wrench is too big for that bolt.
Hmm.
It looks like the right tool, but then I'll pull the other one out of my back pocket and say, "This is actually the right tool," and it's good to
Hmm.
have it in your back pocket.
Right.
And then a lot of it's just overcoming fear.
Hmm.
When it comes to public speaking, 3 out of 4 people in the world suffer from some level of glossophobia, which is the fear of public speaking. Some
Hmm.
people are terrified.
Right.
But the skills, it's just like when you first learned to drive a car. The first time you got in, I know I was terrified,
Yeah.
but now you don't think about it because you've learned the skills and you learned how to go about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, you have to teach this is a good thing, why it's a good thing, and then how it's a good thing. And once
Mm-hmm.
you get those all together, you're usually in pretty good shape.
Mm-hmm. Reminds me of what you were just talking about, giving people different tools to do different things. There was a guy that written an answer on on a forum and said that, you really need to stand out and be something different. Like, don't just because somebody else is doing it the same way, don't you do it the same way. And so your story or how you said about pulling out wrenches or getting people to talk about a subject that's different than from what they're normally going to be talking about, like that guy about the auto lineman talking about gardening rather than the auto uh, solution he may have, because that actually breaks people's habits. Like I was, for example, yesterday I was on a tangent about something that happened, and my girlfriend says, "How many windows in your house, Mary Lynn?" And we're like, "Oh, I don't know." I had to stop and think about it. But what she was really trying to do is get me out of what I was constantly stuck in, repeating myself, into doing something different. So, I realized after she did that what she was trying to do. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying is like, um, you know, changing the story.
Well, also because how many times I'm sure you've done this before, you've picked up a book or turned on a show on Netflix or with some
Yeah,
streaming service, and you realize, oh wait a minute, I've seen this before,
yeah.
and you put down the book or you change the channel. A lot of times people have seen stories before, and if you look just like somebody else, they might not in the meeting be able to shut you off, but they'll shut themselves off.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. You have to open with a little bit of intrigue to
Mm-hmm.
prove that you're different and to break them out of that complacency that a lot of people deal with when they're hearing something that they think they know or they think they know enough about.
Right, right, right. Yeah. So I really liked that little intro. That was great. So tell me a little bit of so you explained a little bit about the obstacles that your clients have and some of the ways to overcome them and how you help them overcome them. So what are some of the bigger challenges that you see people have, whether it's in a workplace or, whoever your clients are?
There are so many of them, but let me stick to a couple that are primary themes.
Uh,
One theme that we have, especially I deal a lot in the high tech industry. I deal a lot with people that are very, very detailed, very, very technical. Very, very smart folks. But there are smart people in every industry.
mm-hmm,
This just happens to be the ones I deal with more often, and they suffer from the curse of too much knowledge.
mm-hmm,
And when you suffer from knowing too much, sometimes you fall into the habit of trying to communicate that. I need this person I need to tell them all about this, 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 and this. So I
mm-hmm.
want to tell them about every little feature that I have or every little nuance, or maybe even pride of ownership. If you're a technical person and
Right.
you develop something,
Mm-hmm,
you want to get that out there. And I tell people, don't think of it that way. You have to think outside in versus inside out. It's
mm-hmm,
not about getting through your information. It's about how are you trying to change the thinking of the person you're talking to. Maybe it's just you're trying to educate them on a particular thing, something that could be helpful for them. So if
mm-hmm.
we're talking and I want to explain to you how to properly use, I happen to have, I do photography. If I want to teach you how to use this camera, for instance, I want to say, okay, well, how is Marilyn going to use that camera? Do I need to go into all the features, or is she going to put it in automatic and take some pictures of, what's in her backyard?
Mm-hmm.
So I need to, one, maybe you're nervous about using it. There's you look, that's a big pro level camera and it can be intimidating. Maybe I need to help you overcome a little bit of fear of something that might appear to be really complicated. So
Mm-hmm.
start with that goal, what you're trying to get out of it as the person listening to me. And also, what are you trying to overcome?
Mm-hmm.
And if I start with that, I eliminate a whole bunch of content that is not important to you and it's not going to help you and it's not going to help me help you.
Right.
So I think that is the biggest thing that I try to start off with people. I tell them audiences are selfish. They're not, yeah, oh, they're not in the room because they like you. They're not in the
Yeah.
room probably because they like you or they even want to get to know you. They're there to get something out of you.
Right.
So if you can figure that out and figure out how to deliver that to them, well, then you're a step down the right path.
Mm-hmm. 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 So who are your best clients that you like to serve or help?
I do love salespeople. I love salespeople so much. And a lot of the times it's because a lot of them have a fighter pilot mentality, because a lot of salespeople have been really successful,
Mm-hmm.
and they go in and it's like, hey, I know what I'm doing. I don't need any help. And I love showing those people something that they go, wait a minute, that will help me. And I
Mm-hmm.
love seeing those walls come down when they realize that they don't know everything. And some of them are very open to start with, but some of them are a little bit standoffish.
Yeah.
And I love seeing the change when they find something that works for them and they
Mm-hmm.
start to open up and realize, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
This is going to help me out. Those are great. I love executives who have to get in front of big rooms, because these are people that are oftentimes very accomplished at speaking,
Mm-hmm.
but they need the nuances. They're what I
Mm-hmm.
call the 90 percenters. They do 90% of everything perfectly right,
Mm-hmm.
but they're competing against other executives who are 90 percenters too.
Mm-hmm.
So getting to 91% and finding that fine tuning that will give them the edge over that other expert,
Mm-hmm.
that's really fun, because you
Mm-hmm.
get you get to go into the nuances a lot.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
those are two of my favorite types of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to this salesperson because you really got to get, you know, in their inner self where they are and bring that out, right?
Some people are not good at, and it's a great point, by the way. Some people are not good about sharing their inner self.
Mm-hmm.
The weird dichotomy about being a public speaker, salesperson, someone who gets in front of a room, is there are two sides. One, you have to be selfless,
Mm-hmm.
where you're focusing on their needs, not your own.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, when you become selfless, if you're nervous at all, there's no place for it to live, because
Mm-hmm.
nervousness lives in your head. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
not in your head, you're usually in good shape. But also, you have to be entirely open,
Mm-hmm.
because the more of me that I give to you, the more that you feel I'm giving you my authentic self, the
Right.
more you're going to connect with me.
Mm-hmm.
And if we connect well, you're probably going to listen to me and
Mm-hmm.
feel like, oh, Rob's a decent guy. He seems
Yeah.
like he's telling me the truth, and I'll listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be both totally open and self-honest and selfless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what would be some ideas that you would suggest that to help people become more of that selfless and
I'll start with the biggest thing. It's really practice.
mm-hmm.
Going back to the car metaphor. First time you got in a car, scared to death, didn't know what you're doing. I didn't know how to drive a shift. My dad had to teach me, because my mom, for some reason, I learned how to drive an automatic from my mom, but she couldn't teach me how to drive a shift.
Right.
My dad could, because he took a
Yeah.
different approach with me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's once I learned the basics, I had to practice them. And if
Right.
you want to become a master, you've heard it takes 10,000 hours to become a master at any skill.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to become a 10,000 hour master, but
Mm-hmm.
you do have to practice, and practice as you play. I
Mm-hmm.
see so many people that if I say, have you practiced? Oh, yeah, I did it in my car. Really? Are you doing your talk in your car?
Mm-hmm.
No.
No.
Then why do you think it's going to help you? So it's a situation, if you're going to give a presentation in a boardroom, go find a boardroom. If
Mm-hmm.
you're going to give it on a stage, try to simulate the stage area. Try to imagine what the room would be like. Because if you don't, and someone throws something new at you, that can throw you off your rhythm.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you're going to memorize a script, because I don't recommend people memorizing scripts ever.
Right. Right.
They should own the gist. They should know
Mm-hmm.
what they're going to talk about and know their format, and that's vitally important. But don't try to memorize a script, because most people don't do it well. Unless you're a trained actor, you're probably not going to do it well.
Right. Right.
So the first thing is just practice. Know what you're trying to accomplish. Think from the outside in. Practice what you're going to say. Go over it. So when something new comes to you're just flowing, and you can
Mm-hmm.
react to that, because you've got extra brain cells that will help you, and you're not constantly focusing. I have to say this next. I have to say this next. I have to say this next.
Right.
And also, I'm not against using crutches, as long as they don't get in the way of your connection with your audience. I
Mm-hmm.
see people use cards. I see people use PowerPoints. That's okay. If you need something to keep you on flow,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. But reference it and then ignore
Mm-hmm.
it and just
Mm-hmm.
connect with your audience again.
Mm-hmm.
So, practice is a huge thing. And there are a whole litany of skills that you have to learn to be really effective. How do you use your voice, your body, props, gesture sets, intonation, shifts of pace? That's vitally important to be a presenter. But
Mm-hmm.
also, how do you build your story well?
Mm-hmm.
How do you build it in a way that you've got a structure that always is going to work for you? And there are simple structures that are used in everything from fairy tales to bedtime stories to Hollywood blockbusters that can be used in conversations that you have with anyone,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's one-on-one across the country over a webcast, or whether that's standing in front of a room of 500, 600 people on a big main stage with a light in your face.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing is test all your stuff. I've seen so many people be thrown because their mic didn't work, or they didn't know how to handle a mic properly, or they didn't know how to use the clicker for their PowerPoint if they're using that, or they were going to do some kind of prop gag as part of their talk, and
Right.
they didn't realize, oh, you don't have a table? What? I probably should have tested that and asked about a table. So things like that. I mean, if you know your structure, practice it and test it, usually you're in pretty good shape.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. I can see that the people listening to this call are going to be challenged in figuring out what was going to work for them for their storyline and how it's going to affect them and what they need to do really in their business or whatever they're doing or in their sales, right?
Oh, sure. And it's knowing where to put stories.
Mm-hmm.
There are different types of stories that you can use.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and also, you don't have to use a story. You can use a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking before, and I remember we were having a conversation, and I have it right here because I used a metaphor to you. I used the dollar bill
Right.
versus the silver dollar.
Mm-hmm.
But, both have the same value, but one is way more memorable.
Right.
It's not a story. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
It kind of does, but not in the classical sense.
Right.
But it gives you a lot of edges because one, it's physical, which activates different parts of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, it's intriguing
Mm-hmm.
and it's also memorable.
Mm-hmm.
And what if I can't do it now, Marilyn, though I'd love to. If I could magically give you this silver dollar and you put it on your desk, every time you looked at the silver dollar, you think of me.
Right.
And it's just these type of little tricks that you can use. And people often get intimidated. That's hokey. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I've done those type of bits in front of rooms of 20 salespeople, hardened, grizzled, high-tech salespeople.
Right.
And they've smiled and applauded because I got them to think differently.
Right.
And it's finding your particular tool that you want to use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I totally get it. I totally get it. Because, I used to, when I started off doing in businesses, I used to make hearts out of clay and I'd pass them out like my business cards. And it was always surprising me how many people would say, I don't want one. And I said, what? You don't want one? But then they'd come back to me and I said, I didn't realize what you're doing. I do want one. And people could remember me from those little hearts. So I think that's very key point is, whether it's just an individual that's trying to establish themselves in their business, or even for a business that is trying to establish their workplace, they all have this key points that help remember each other and provide a better communication tool. Just thought that makes sense.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
what I just said. So anyway, I know you've had some really successful stories, and I like the idea about your coin idea because it gives, like you said, gives you to be somebody to remember by, just having that coin on your desk and to remember you. So tell me a little bit about some examples of stories of clients that you've worked with that have been successful, or maybe even if you're willing, if it hasn't been so successful.
Sure. Let me start with one that has been one of my personal favorites, and I do retell the story quite a bit because I thought it was so incredibly effective. And it's a situation where a gentleman was doing his closing story,
Mhm.
So there was a team of people, and one was doing an opening story to create intrigue. One was doing a customer story to persuade and prove to people that their solution was going to be great. And this
Mhm.
gentleman's task was to tell a final story that he wanted people to remember.
Mhm.
And what he was trying to prove, and again, if you think about goal driven, I want to change your thinking.
Mhm.
The thing he was trying to prove is that their implementation process was watertight,
Mhm.
that there were no gaps in it, that you could feel incredibly confident as a customer that they were going to do things from A to Z perfectly. And he was a gentleman by the name of David. He was probably in his mid to late 50s. So he was a gentleman who's been around.
Mhm.
And he started it, said, when I was 17, I was learning how to fly a plane. And I was at a small airstrip. And the interesting thing about the small airstrip is that about 100 yards off it, the trees started growing in a forest, and they went up to 100 feet pretty quickly. So you had to make sure that you could lift off well and clear those trees. So one of
Mhm.
the things that they tell you about is your pre-flight check.
Mhm.
And because of this airport, they made sure that weight and power, to make sure you had enough power to overcome your weight to clear those trees, vitally important.
Mhm.
And you did the walk around and you made sure the weight was balanced and all those important things. One day I heard about a plane that had clipped a tree as it was leaving, and now it had to circle back and land. One was fine. Plane just had a little bit of damage, but they couldn't make their run.
Mhm.
And I asked the flight instructor, I said, what happened? He goes, well, I mean, they didn't have enough power and they had too much weight. It's like, well, didn't they do a pre-flight check? It's like, well, yeah, but they were carrying Christmas trees. Okay. Didn't they weigh the Christmas trees? He goes, oh yeah, they did. What they didn't realize is that when Christmas trees travel a certain distance before they take off, they're watered,
Mhm.
and hence too much weight. Hence, they didn't
Yeah.
account for that. And so he stops and he looks at the room and takes a moment, and he looks at the room and says, "Do you really want to be a plane full of Christmas trees?" And the room went. I mean, it was dead silent. A lot of smiles, a lot of nods,
Mhm.
and it was one of those situations where, at the end of that day, when people were leaving, I heard a number of times, "Plane full of Christmas trees." The thing about a story is it's memorable,
Mhm.
because if you spend in in sales, if you spend thousands of dollars getting in an hour with a potential client,
Mhm.
if they only remember you for that hour,
Mhm.
your influence stops.
Right.
So you need to make sure that they will remember your message and they can pass it along. And the great thing about stories, it is the way that all of us remember things.
Mhm.
If you think of a joke that you've heard on a Saturday and you've told on a Monday morning, well, the reason you have is for two reasons. One, it had value, it was
Mhm.
funny. And two, it was put in a story structure so you remembered it well.
Mhm.
You've basically helped a story go viral, not online, not with a retweet or a share,
Yeah.
but by sharing it around what we used to call water cooler talk.
You're right. Right.
And that is the power of stories. It enables you to package things that have value that people want to share. And by the way, the minute they share it, if you told me a joke, Mary Lynn, I don't know who told you the joke. So it's a joke Mary Lynn told me. Your brand is on it.
Mhm.
You have to be confident that it has enough value for you to put your brand on it. But also,
Right.
I am now propagating your brand.
Mhm.
Mary Lynn told me this great joke. Let me share it with you.
Yeah.
And the same thing, if you heard a story from a salesperson and you said, "Hey, I heard this great story that really taught me something from Gail DeBartolo from XYZ company." Well, now you're carrying their message.
Right.
It's an incredibly powerful tool.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that is the ones that go well. The
Mm.
ones that don't, usually there are many reasons why they don't go well. Bad structure, people don't know how to tell them well, they become a ramble fest. The ones that I usually see come up, I wouldn't say most often, but quite often,
Mhm.
is where people miss the brevity versus detail balance. When I told you that story about the plane, I
Mhm.
told you about the gentleman that told me the story.
Right.
And do you remember I mentioned roughly how old he was?
Mhm.
And do you remember that?
Yeah, he's about 50 years old.
Okay. Do you remember his name by any chance?
No.
Okay, his name was David.
Mm-hmm.
And I did mention that, but you did remember his age. So
Mm-hmm.
you had a picture in your mind of a 50-something-year-old man.
Mm-hmm.
That was about the right level of detail and brevity
Mm-hmm.
because you're thinking about it. If I told you a story about walking into a warehouse, so if I was going to tell you a story about something that happened and it happened to happen in the warehouse. So I'm going to say, yeah, I was walking into this warehouse. It's one of those classic 1800s brick warehouses where you can kind of smell the paper they made in it the minute you walked in. And, with those big windows, a lot of great light. But anyway, the story, and then I jump into the story. But
Mm-hmm.
now you've got smell,
Mm-hmm.
sight, even texture, because I said it's one of those old brick buildings.
Right.
So your mind is registering texture, sight, and sound.
Mm-hmm.
That helps you remember. But it didn't take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that don't edit themselves well.
Mm. Okay.
And that's one of the key things. Knowing what's important in your story,
Mm-hmm.
still getting the detail to make it memorable, but deleting the things that aren't going to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I tell people, um, you have to keep the truth of the story, not always the individual detail truth. If I tell you a story that was about toast, that had toast in it, but I
Mm.
had eggs for breakfast, does it really matter?
Yeah. Sorry.
Uh, happens all the time.
Yeah.
No, it probably doesn't matter that it's eggs versus toast.
Yeah.
That was the truth. Toast was the truth, but I don't have to tell that truth because it doesn't affect the key truth of my story. I
Right.
can change the details. If it's more effective telling the story it happened in a warehouse than an office, I'll tell the story that it happened in a warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that, yeah, a lot of ones that fail are the ones that people don't edit correctly. They don't have a
Right.
good structure and they try to put too much in it and they shy away from the truth of the story and try to put too many little truths in it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I starting to hear as you're more talking about stories and problems that people have, and I know, okay, I've done a few of those myself.
As have we all.
Anyway, so is there any last minute things you'd like to share, Robert, before we end our call?
Sure. I think when it comes to storytelling, anyone can cook a meal,
Mm-hmm.
anyone can fight a fire.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to be a pro at it, you got to go and learn about it.
Right.
Whether you learn it from me, whether you learn it from somebody else, whether you go on YouTube and search up some things, you've got to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an incredibly powerful tool. If anyone has a moth night in their town or their city,
Yeah.
moth nights are storytelling nights. They are not business stories,
Yeah.
but they are incredibly powerful and evocative.
Mm-hmm.
And if you hear a great storyteller, and the Mark Twains of the world, the Garrison Keillors, the people that really knew how to tell stories, they are magical.
Mm-hmm.
So I would invite everyone to bring a little magic into their lives
Mm-hmm.
and learn how to tell stories better
Mm-hmm.
and do the work. Because if you learn the basics, if you learn the basic structures and basic skills, you can put almost any story into them.
Mm-hmm.
And it can change your personal life, your professional life. It is really a magical skill set to bring into your world.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love some of the stories that you were sharing, and of course, I'm sure everybody has great stories to share. But how do we incorporate them so that it can work for us? Whether you're in sales or you know
Yeah.
being.
People have bought so many tools that don't use them.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Robert, for joining me today. And I'm sure that our listeners are going to get a lot of great ideas from you, and probably reach out and see if you can work with them. So,
I would love to.
yeah. So anyway, thank you for joining us today. And you'll be able to get Robert's information on his page, but it'll be on podcast.heartatworkonline.org. And you can also now listen to our podcasts on Anchor. So if you rather listen, you can listen to it on Anchor. If you want to watch the video, it's going to be on podcast.heartatworkonline.org. I was actually going to quit doing the videos, but I decided I'm going to keep them going. So anyway, because it has a connection, right? The story is in the connection too.
Well, a lot of the information people get is visual, so they learn more when they can see more. even though it's a lot easier when you're on the treadmill or driving to listen to the podcast.
Right, right, for sure. Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining me, Robert. I so appreciate it. And we'll be talking to everybody later. Okay. In the meantime, have yourself a kind day. Bye.